Hello, today's video is going to talk about what exactly is going to go into your antithesis essay. We're getting to the end of this unit, so we want to make sure that our idea of the structure is clear. But first, I just want to reiterate a few things from the assignment sheet, just to make sure that you're clear on what exactly it is you're writing in this essay. Now, as we talked about, we're working towards our final assignment of the course, which is the argument essay, right? That's the side that you truly believe, the one that you want to support. So if you look at the example of Charlotte, right, it walks through how she got her thesis, right, the thesis statements that didn't quite work. But she comes up with what she truly believes, that state colleges and universities should be tuition-free for qualifying students who make adequate academic progress. Okay, nicely written thesis, hits all our criteria, and it's what she truly believes, so she feels very passionate. For the antithesis essay, remember the whole purpose of this essay is to make sure we understand the opposing side and that there is a reasonable opposition to prove that our thesis, in this case, this example, is in fact arguable. She came up with, while measures should be put in place to lower college tuition prices, state colleges and universities cannot and should not be made tuition free. So this example is also a good thesis. It's not what Charlotte actually believes, but that's the point of the antithesis. So she will write her antithesis essay, the one that has a draft due this upcoming due date, with this thesis as what she is supporting. So in her introduction for the antithesis essay, she will have this thesis about how it should not be tuition free. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you're really clear on what exactly we're looking for there. So next, let's talk about the antithesis essay structure. Now the structure is going to be largely the same when we get around to the argument essay, but I do want to focus on what goes into the antithesis essay. Now, a lot of what we see here is the same that we saw in our urban legend essay. It's just a slightly different focus. So you're going to start with a clear introduction that's going to have an attention getter, right? Most of us had some good attention getters last time, so continue to write good attention getters that are both relevant and interesting for your topic. You chose the topic, so tell us what's interesting about it. The background information. This is where you should introduce the debate. Okay, what exactly is controversial? Okay, but you should be relatively neutral. Okay, so a neutral understanding of the controversy or the debate. This will give your reader a clear understanding of what exactly you're talking about in this essay, right? But you shouldn't start off being very argumentative, because you have to give your reader some sense that you understand both sides of the issues. Then our who cares so what, so just like you did in the urban legend essay, be clear about why this topic matters so much. Then of course you're going to end your introduction with a clear thesis that is arguable, appropriately qualified, and strongly worded. We went over what those were in a different lesson, so if you need to review those, please do so. Okay, we're especially worried and focused on the first one, arguable. That's the whole purpose of this essay, is to make sure we have arguable thesis statements in the antithesis and in the eventual argument essay that we will be writing. Okay, so that's what we want to look for in that first strong paragraph. From there, we're going to actually, support the thesis, prove the thesis. You remember, our thesis statement is at the top of our pyramid. Then we have individual reasons that the thesis is true. And then we have evidence and support to show why the reason is true and thus why the thesis is true. This is something we went over at the beginning of the unit as well. But for each body paragraph, keep in mind you want an individual reason for the thesis to be true. So you should be able to look at each body paragraph and say, this is what the reason is that this paragraph is supporting. And that should be written in the topic sentence. The topic sentence should very clearly state what the reason is to make your reader clear on what exactly you're going for. And remember that we want to follow the because test, and I'll show you what that means in just a moment. But in other words, as I told you before, you should be able to read your thesis, say in your mind the word because, then read your reason or your topic sentence, and it should make sense grammatically. That's a good way to make sure your structure is clear. Then in the paragraph, you can't just say your reason and hope your reader believes you. You have to actually prove it. You have to use evidence. So use evidence from your sources. We've talked about that many times. For using inductive/deductive reasoning to prove your thesis. Okay, so you might use inductive reasoning, a lot of data to come up with some general principle, or deductive reasoning, that type of syllogism type reasoning that leads to a logical conclusion to prove your thesis. Okay, and it's a really good idea to have at least one piece of evidence per body paragraph. You can have more, of course, But if you don't have any evidence in a paragraph, it doesn't really feel complete, and it certainly doesn't go forward enough with the idea of logos, right? And keep in mind, we want to keep ethos, pathos, and logos readily apparent throughout our whole essay. But with the logic, you really got to make sure that you're having the strong evidence. Okay? So let's look at a sample paragraph. This is also going to be available for you on D2L. But I have a sample body paragraph from an argumentative essay. Okay, so let's say our thesis is that vaccination should be given more widely to children in spite of unfounded fears about the dangers of vaccines. So that's what the student is trying to argue overall. So one single body paragraph is going to say that vaccines help protect people that cannot receive vaccines themselves. This is not the entire argument. That is not the only reason that the thesis is true from the student's perspective, but it is one of several. And you want to have several reasons to come at it from multiple perspectives. Okay? And then you can read the paragraph on your own to see how exactly it is proven, but I want to just point you to a few things. Okay? The reason is that vaccines help protect people that cannot receive vaccines themselves. This follows that because test, right? Vaccinations should be given more widely to children in spite of unfounded fears about the dangers of vaccines because vaccines help protect people that cannot receive vaccines themselves, right? Grammatically, that makes sense, so that's a good structure for our argument, okay? Now, as for the deductive reasoning in this paragraph, and notice that this is still written as a good paragraph with transitions and evidence and everything, but the core, the structure, the outline looks something like this. My reason is that vaccines help protect people that cannot receive vaccines themselves. The deductive reasoning behind that goes something like this. Some children cannot get vaccines. Okay? That's a principle, a general idea that I support with evidence, and I give evidence that that's a true statement. Now, I go to the next principle supported by evidence that those children will be safer if all other people have vaccines. Okay? Now, an assumption that I'm making is that children should be protected from disease when possible. Most people would agree with this, so it's okay to make that as an assumption. I don't need evidence for that. And then I also make another assumption that the benefits of vaccinating everyone possible is worth the trouble. Some people may not agree with that, so I need to decide if I need evidence for that. But if all of these things are true, then I get to my logical conclusion, which also happens to be related to my thesis, that vaccination should be given more widely to children. Okay? So all of this proves that vaccines help protect people that cannot receive vaccines themselves. And because of all this, that also means that vaccines should be given, as was stated in my thesis. Okay? That's really what you want to do in each of your body paragraphs. It's very logical, very logos-based, has evidence, and then taken together, it's going to have a really strong set of support for your thesis statement. Okay, so really try to have that in every paragraph. Okay. You also want to pay attention to the order of your paragraphs. We'll talk more about this in the next essay, so I'm not going to be too focused on it when I'm grading the antithesis essay, but you do have to decide if you have multiple body paragraphs, and you'll probably have at least 2 at the very minimum. You got to think about which order you want to put them in, which one comes first, second, third. Look for a reasonable order. Typically, people like order of importance, maybe build to your most important reason last, but there's a few choices. The big thing is make sure that it has coherence. That's flows, as we've talked about, that one paragraph makes sense before the next, and so forth, okay? And then finally, we want to, consider our conclusion. This should not be a new reason. Any reasons for your thesis need to be in the body paragraphs, but the conclusion should reiterate the importance of the thesis going forward. So don't summarize, don't repeat yourself, but rather think about, if all of this happens, if we follow your advice, if we follow your thesis, what can we look forward to? Okay, that would give us a really strong conclusion. Okay? One last thing I want to point your attention to. I had you read in chapter 5 the sample essay, Why Organic Foods Are Worth the Extra Money. That's on page 95. I want you to just look through this essay and see how it follows everything we just talked about. Okay? The introduction does have all of this good material, right? A good attention getter. And it does have a thesis. It's not the last sentence, but it does have a thesis in there. Well, actually, no, it is the last sentence. However, current research shows that the health and environmental benefits of organic foods outweigh their extra cost. So this is pushing for organic foods. Okay? Then each body paragraph is giving a reason that that's true, or it's dealing with the opposition, which is something we'll talk about in the next essay assignment. But for instance, on page 95, the first body paragraph, organic foods are produced without using most chemical pesticides, without artificial fertilizers, without genetic engineering, and without radiation. Next paragraph. According to environmental scientist Craig Minowa, organic foods tend to cost about 15% more than non-organic, mainly because they are currently more difficult to produce. But in the next paragraph, the extra cost is certainly worthwhile in terms of health benefits. Next, organic meat, poultry, and dairy products can address another health concern, the diminishing effectiveness of antibiotics, and so forth. If you look at each paragraph and how it supports the thesis, you have a really strong model. Okay? So to wrap up, what I want you to consider when you're structuring your own argumentative essay, in this case the antithesis essay, I'm still going to look for logic. I want you to have good ethos, pathos, logos, good inductive, deductive reasoning, and you need to avoid logical fallacies. Okay, just because this is the other side doesn't mean you can make a caricature or a false idea of what the other side believes. You have to get in their mind and you need to present the argument as if you believe what they say, because that's the only way to truly understand the opposition that you're trying to disprove later down the road. Okay, so still write a good argument, still use good evidence, write a solid argument essay for this antithesis essay, and you'll be in good shape.